So once all of our footage has rendered, we get a nice 100% and a green tick, and we can see that everything is completed. And if we actually go to the Finder, we can see the folder we created, the proxy renders, and here we can see each of the QuickTimes rendered out individually, which also include the source audio that we chose to bring with it. And if we look at the file format, we can see that these have been rendered to Apple ProRes proxy, including the audio, stereo, 16-bit, 48 kHz audio, and at 25 frames a second. And this gives us our footage to then take into Final Cut Pro 10, which we'll do now. To do this, we'll save our project and Quick Resolve. And now we can boot Final Cut Pro 10. With Final Cut open, we can now select a destination to create a new event, and I'm going to create it on my drive HMSSD-B. I'm going to name my event. And now I'm going to import my media. I'm going to select Proxy Renders folder, and I can get a preview of my footage there. At this point, I'm going to bring all of my footage into Final Cut, pressing Import All, bringing it into this existing event, and then leaving the other options as they are. Now we're inside Final Cut. We can see all of the footage that's maintained our first light grade. And it's now quick for us to make a new project. And give it a name. And now we can start to find some clips and simply edit them down into the timeline in Final Cut. Now we have a very basic timeline that we've cut just to represent our offline edit that we're happy with. At this point, we're going to go to the File menu and we're going to export an XML. I'm going to save the XML to my working drive in a new folder called XML and maintain the name of the project and the timeline. With my XML saved, I can now quit Final Cut and I can reopen Resolve. I'm going to log back in as a user that I've set up, and this time I'm actually going to open up the project that I was working with already. Now that we're back in Resolve, we're going to go to the Conform page. We're going to go up to the File menu and we're going to go to Import AAF, EDL and XML. We're going to look for our XML that we just exported from Final Cut 10 and press Open. At this point we're now presented with a load of options and a dialog box. We can see the imported timeline that we're going to bring in, which matches the name that we gave our XML. And we have a couple of settings. At this point we can automatically set the project settings, which we're going to do, and we could continue to automatically import the source clips into the media pool. But however, what we want to do is to deselect this, because we're not going to import the proxy QuickTimes which are exported. We're more interested now in actually relinking to our DNG files, our original raw footage. We could also at this point choose to bring in sizing information from Final Cut and even basic color correction that had been applied inside of Final Cut. As we've done neither, we're going to leave these options blank and press OK. Now we can see a new timeline that's been created, denoted here by the name Southwall Offline 01, and shown in our timeline view up in the top left hand corner. And we can also see the duration, which will match the duration of our offline edit from Final Cut. And if we want to start to come down and actually look, we can see that our cuts have been maintained and we have our final edited sequence from Final Cut back inside of Resolve. Now if we step back into the colour room, we have the power to actually start to grade this footage with more finesse and to do a few more things with it. The important thing to note here is that we now have gone back to our camera data and we're using the raw DNG files. If we even double click on the timeline, we can see that the files and the data is raw DNG. So what we've achieved is we've achieved our cut inside of Final Cut, but we're now using the raw DNG back inside of Resolve, which will allow us again to affect any of the settings that we wanted to, and to have all of the power of the DNG files and the raw workflow on our final edited sequence. A few things we could do here would be to explore some of the other nodes and the other options we have. If we go up to the node tree and we come down to add a serial node with CPW, this shows that we're going to create a node with a power window. And this window, if we start to pull it out, can very easily allow us to start to create a vignette to the footage. At this point, we can choose to grade either the inside or the outside of the window. In the case of creating a vignette, we'll want to change it so that it's inverted. And as we start to pull down the blacks, what we're doing is we're starting to create a look and a vignette just to the outside of the footage here. And this is denoted, as you can start to see, the blacks start to crush just in the corners, and you're starting to get the effects of a vignette. What we've done up here is we've maintained our primary color correction on the first node, but we've used our secondary power window just on the second node. So at any point we can turn this node on and off, and we can see the operation of adding a vignette, but just to this second node. This is a good practice in Resolve, as it allows you to separate out your color correction processes. As we move through the clips, we can again start to correct and change things. And in this option, we're going to add more of a gradation to the sky. So again, we're going to go up to the nodes. This time we're going to select serial node, but instead of selecting a circular shaped power window, we're going to select a window here, which is rectangular, just to deal with working with the sky. again. In this case, I'm going to start to pull down the exposure within this window, just so we can start to see a bit more cloud detail. I'm going to bring the window down, and I'm going to apply a lot of softness so that it works naturally with the scene. If we do a before and after, we can see now that we're only doing correction to the top half of the clip. And a useful feature, as well as the pop-ups which tell you exactly what you've done when you select each node, you also get a little thumbnail preview of what you've done to each node. Again, what's useful in Resolve is at any point we could go up to the view menu and we could grab a still, and what we've done here is, again, we've saved the corrections as well as a reference still, so we could very easily then apply elements onto a different clip. What's impressive to see when working with the BlackMagic cinema camera, and especially when working with RAW inside of Resolve, is just how much power we have over the image and how much latitude there is to play with. If we turn off the selection here, so we see nothing other than the image itself, and then we deselect all of the correction, we can see our original image, our color corrected first light image, and then some of the secondary work we've done to bring back the sky detail, which before looked like it was completely white and blown out. But this really illustrates just how powerful it is when you work in a raw workflow, because you still have all of this information that's available for the grade. If this was a full project, we would spend a lot longer working through each of the clips and color correcting. Assuming we'd spent time now to go through the entire grade and finish the project so that we're completely happy with it, we can now go into the delivery room and select a couple of options. At this point, if we decided that we wanted to finish everything out of Resolve, instead of selecting an easy setup, we could select a format, be it QuickTime, DPX, Avid, and then select a codec. We could also then decide to render everything to a single completed QuickTime clip. However, in this case, we're going to go one last time back into Final Cut 10, just so that we can finish and see the whole completed project back inside of our editorial package, so we could then add music and graphics and credits. From the easy setup, I've selected Final Cut Pro XML roundtrip. This time, instead of choosing a proxy codec to render to, I'm going to select QuickTime HQ, because this is going to be our final graded master. I'm going to select a destination again. In this case, I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it Final Grades, and press OK. Again, we can select audio to be passed onto the clip, and we also have the option to add handles. And what handles does is that it allows us to add additional frames either side of the clip, so that once we're inside of Final Cut, if we decide to change the edit just by a fraction, by a few frames, then we have handles on either side. It's a kind of last option to be able to slip your edits just by a slight fraction once you're back inside of Final Cut, and it's often a good thing to do. If you decide not to add handles at this point, and inside of Final Cut you end up wanting to slip your edit, what you'll find is you'll run out of graded footage, because you'll only have the footage that you would have sent through into Final Cut. I'm going to add the job, and now I'm going to press render to do our final render out of Resolve. So once our final graded material is completely rendered inside of Resolve, the first thing we're going to do is go to the Conform page, go to File, and then Export, and we're going to be exporting an XML. And you'll notice here we've got the name of our offline sequence, Southworld Offline 01, but in brackets it says Resolve, because what we're doing is we're actually sending an XML timeline out of Resolve, which we're then going to import back into Final Cut 10. With that exported, we can now save our project one last time and quit Resolve. If we look in the XML folder, we can see the XML that's been generated, and again, to note that it's come from Resolve, it has Resolve written in brackets. We can now boot Final Cut, and now with Final Cut loaded, we can go to the File menu, Import, and Import XML. We're now going to click on the XML with Resolve in brackets. This is the XML we exported from Resolve, and we're now importing it back into Final Cut. And what we can see is that it's created a new events folder here, and the events, if we click and reveal the media in the browser, the events relates to the rendered material, which is sitting inside of our final grades folder, the same folder we made before we rendered out of Resolve. This denotes that we're now working back inside of Final Cut 10, but with our final graded material. And if we look below at our project, we can see our timeline in place, but with all of our graded data, the vignettes we've applied, and the cloud data that we brought back by using the power of selective secondary colouring to really bring back the detail in the raw formats from the BlackMagic cinema camera. At this point inside of Final Cut, we could then add graphics, music, credits, and finish our entire project. But this really wraps up and shows that we've done a complete round trip, taking the project initially from Resolve, from our first light, making proxy media to go here inside of Final Cut in our first edit, editing that footage, doing an XML out of Final Cut, sending that XML back into Resolve, tweaking our final grades in Resolve, and sending a final XML from Resolve back into Final Cut 10 to create a final sequence of all our graded material. At the time of recording this, we can see the one thing that hasn't come through in our final XML is the audio, which we sent from Resolve. I believe this is just a bug at present and something which will soon be fixed, but a workaround is to take your audio from your previous offline cut and then to apply this audio and do a final mix into your final Resolve graded cut. So this is a workaround, and hopefully something which will be rectified soon.